How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Wednesday, Yom Revi'i. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house on a Wednesday? Yehudit in South Carolina, Bill in Missouri, Paul in Chicago, Paul in the Great Northwest, Carla in Brazil, Melissa in Great Neck, Joe in the Inland Empire, Stephen in New Hampshire, David in Indiana, Paula in the rain, I think. I see the emojis. Where'd it go? Bella in Florida, Jonathan in California, Shandor in the Bronx, Karen in Northern California, Guy in Ohio, Lucy in Minnesota, Hannah in Texas, as well as Marjorie in Virginia, Ella in the house, Marie in Freeport, Sam in Virginia. Welcome, everybody. Our daf is page Yud Zayin, page 17, here in Tractate Kiddushin, the 20th volume of the Talmud. Generally, these are the laws of betrothal, but this Mishna number 2 here in chapter 1 is all about the laws of slavery as it was practiced in the ancient world when slavery existed among the Jewish people. And we've been discussing how do we know that a slave can be acquired for money, or that a slave is acquired with a document, or that a Hebrew slave goes out after 6 years, or that he can choose, these are just some of the laws, he can choose to remain enslaved because it is good for him by his master. So he has his ear pierced with an awl, and then he becomes a permanent slave, but nevertheless, if his master dies, does he go out? Does he leave slavery? And if the Jubilee year comes, does he go out? Yes, he leaves slavery. Okay, we pick this up at the bottom of page 16b. The Gemara asks, isn't a Hebrew slave who flees, right? Remembering, how does a Jew become enslaved to another Jew? Because he chose it, right? He was destitute. And he couldn't find a way to live, and so he sold himself into slavery, or he stole, was unable to make restitution, and then the court sold him into slavery. But either way, the standard period for that is 6 years, and then he goes free. Okay, so he's got to do his 6 years. What about a Hebrew slave who flees before the 6 years are up? After all, like if he stole and he has to make restitution, he's doing it by being enslaved, it's a form of jail, right? Jail is not a punishment. Imprisonment is not one of the punishments that comes up in Torah. So he's just living in somebody's house. I mean, it's pretty easy for him to just hit the road. Well, what happens if he does flee? Isn't a Hebrew slave who flees required to complete the remaining years of his contract, at which point he then should be entitled to receive a severance gift, right? We were talking about this yesterday, that at the end of the 6 years of servitude, when he leaves your house, he shall not go empty-handed. You must give him the parting gift, the severance gift. Well, what if during the time that he was supposed to be serving you, he fled? Do you still owe him that severance gift? As it is taught in a Baraisa, from where is it derived with regard to a Hebrew slave who flees from his master, that he is obligated to complete his term? Well, the verse states, 6 years he shall labor, Exodus 21:2, and no less. Therefore, if a Hebrew slave runs away in the middle of this period, he is required to complete his 6 years of service. Now, one might have thought, now we're on page 17a, one might have thought that even a slave who became sick and is unable to work must work additional time to compensate for the time missed. Therefore, the verse states, and in the 7th he shall go out, which indicates that he leaves his master in any case, even if he has not worked the full 6 years. Rav Sheshes said, with what are we dealing here? This concerns a case where he fled and the Jubilee year arrived immediately afterward, and therefore he did not complete the 6 years of servitude. The novelty of this halacha, of this law, is as follows. Lest you say, since the Jubilee year came and released him, he is considered sent away by you, the master, and therefore we should not penalize him, but grant him the severance gift. He fled, but if he had stayed, let's say, maybe he fled like on the last day of Elul, or actually between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, right? When the Jubilee year comes, it's on Yom Kippur that all slaves go free, right? A Jubilee year was every 50 years when the temple was standing in ancient Israel. And at that point, all slaves would go free, even if they had just entered servitude and had 5 more years to serve. The Jubilee year cancels their servitude. Or what if he fled right before? Maybe he didn't know that the Jubilee year would have freed him, so he fled right before. Okay, so he only missed a day of work. Maybe maybe he fled. Maybe he put in 5 years or almost 6 years. And then he just got sick of it and he fled right before the Jubilee year would have freed him anyway. So should the master pay that severance gift, give him that gift? We're going to discuss what the gift is in a moment. Should the master be on the hook for that? So lest you say, since the Jubilee year released him, he is considered sent away by you, the master, and therefore we should not penalize the slave, but grant him the severance gift. This Baraisa teaches us that once he flees, he forfeits his right to the severance gift. Now, the master said above, one might have thought that even a slave who became sick and was unable to work must work additional time to compensate for the time missed. Therefore, the verse states, and in the 7th he shall go out. And the Gemara asks, is he excused from working additional time, even if he was sick for all 6 years? But isn't it taught in another Baraisa, if he was sick for 3 years and he served for 3 years, he is not obligated to complete the 6 years of actual labor. But if he was sick for all 6 years, he is obligated to complete the 6 years of actual labor. So Rav Sheshes said this is referring to a case where he is unable to perform strenuous work, but he can execute minor tasks such as performing needlework or sewing clothes. Since he can perform work of some kind, this slave is not required to work additional time to compensate for the time missed, even if he was ill for all 6 years. I heard a statistic today. I don't have the source for it, but it might well be true, that in the ancient world, slavery was so widespread that it was estimated, like in Roman times, it was estimated that 1/3 of the whole world population was enslaved. 1/3 of all the people in the world were actually enslaved. How could that be? Well, when you hear this, it was such an institution that you start to develop the understanding, first of all, there was all different kinds of slavery and all different kinds of slaves in different positions, etc. You hear here, obviously the Torah granted slaves in the Jewish world much more rights and protections than they had elsewhere in the world, but I'm sure that, there were still sort of more fortunate and less fortunate slaves, let's say, within the world of slavery. But here, with the case we're talking about here, there's a guy who, probably he can't work and support himself because he is so lame, right? He can't work. He absolutely can't work. So he can't support himself. There's not like a welfare system. There's charity, but maybe he would prefer not to just receive charity and do nothing. He would prefer to actually be a slave. It's contrary to our thinking. We'd never understand that. But in that world, it was so normal that this guy, if he could find some family, some well-to-do family to accept him, he's going to go from being destitute and, just living in some kind of dirt hovel to living, in a nice house like wealthy people. And those people are obligated to feed him and shelter him. He has to have the kind of pillow and the kind of bed and the kind of food that they themselves, that the master and his family eat. And sleep on and etc. Like he has to be taken care of. Now the slave is in return for that providing a lot of valuable work. But this guy's unable to work, right? So as long as he can do some little thing, he's serving in his own way, and he ends up, in a much physically better. Emotionally might be terrible, but physically, he's much better off. And you can see how people ended up in that situation in a society that had much less of a safety net than ours does. Now, the Gemara comments, this matter itself is difficult, as the Baraisa is apparently self-contradictory. On the one hand, you said that if he was sick for 3 years and he served for the other 3 years, so he is not obligated to complete the 6 years of actual labor. At least if he worked half, then it's considered like he did all 6, even if he was sick for 3 of them. So this indicates that if he was sick for 4 years, well, then he is obligated to complete the 6 years of actual labor. On the other hand, say the last clause of the Brisa, if he was sick for all 6 years, he is obligated to complete the 6 years of actual labor. So from this, we would deduce that if he was sick for 4 years, he is not obligated. It's only if he's sick all 6 that he's obligated to, make up the years that he'd missed because he was sick. So if he was sick for 4 years, he would have to make it up. As opposed when we learned that if he was sick for 3 years, if he was sick for 3 years or less, he doesn't have to make up the years that he missed. Meaning that if he was sick for 4 years, he would have to make up what he missed. So which is it? The guy who, was sick for 4 years, does he owe what he missed or not? I'm sorry. This indicates that if he was ill for 4 years, he is not obligated. Right, when you're comparing it to 6 years, it would seem like only if he was sick all 6 years, he has to make up the labor. But if he's less than that, according to that phrase, he doesn't have to make it up. But according to the phrase that said 3 years or more, 3 years or less, he's excused, but otherwise he has to make it up. You can see how there's a contradiction. So the Gemara answers, well, this indicates that if he was ill for 4 years, he is not obligated to complete the 6 years of actual labor. And the Gemara answers that this is what the Bryce is saying. If he was sick for 4 years, he becomes like one who was sick for all 6 years, and therefore he is required to complete the 6 years of actual labor. Right. So the first teaching is what stands. He's supposed to serve for 6 years. As long as he completes at least half of those years of service, let's say 3 years and a day, then if he was sick for the other, 3 years minus a day, he doesn't have to make that up. The master was unlucky. But if he, is sick for more than 3 years, then he has to make up what he missed. Now, the sages taught, how much does one grant a freed slave as a severance gift? It is 5 sela in value of each and every type mentioned in this verse, Deuteronomy 15:14. And you shall grant severance to him out of your flock and out of your threshing floor and out of your wine press. Right? So these are the 3 categories of value, basically, in the agrarian society, right? Livestock, grain, and wine. Which is a total. So since it says you shall give him severance from these 3 categories, and 5 sela is the minimum of value. I'm not sure where they get that, but 5 sela is assumed to be the minimum value of what you can give from each category. Therefore, it's a total of 15 sela. This is the statement of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, you give him 30 sela in total, like the 30 shekels of the fine that is paid for a slave who is gored by an ox. And Rabbi Shimon says the master gives him 50 shekels, like the sum of valuations, arachin vows, right? If a person vows to give the value of himself, the value of a person, to the temple treasury, so the Torah specifies. I mean, you can vow to give whatever amount you want, right, as a pledge, as it were, to donate to the temple treasury for the temple upkeep. It's a free will money offering that you want to give to the temple, let's say to show gratitude for everything, all the ways that the Lord has blessed you. So you can give anything you want. But if you say, I will give my value, so the Torah says, okay, for a male 20 to 60 years of age, his value is 50 shekels. So if you want to give your value to the temple, you give 50 silver shekels. So in these 3, so they're saying, how much do you have to give, right? The Torah only said that when your slave goes free, you have to give him from the livestock, the threshing floor, and the wine press. But it doesn't say how much. But the word give is the clue. And they look at other areas in the Torah where it says you have to give a certain amount of money. And in those areas, you will find 30 shekels. It's what's given to the master if somebody's ox gores his slave. Rabbi Shimon says it should be 50 shekels because that's what you give the temple if you vow to give your own value and you are a male between 20 and 60. So the master said above, the master gives 5 selah of each and every type, which is 15 selah. This is the statement of Rabbi Meir. And the Gemara asks, and does Rabbi Meir come to teach us to count? His novelty certainly cannot be that 3 5s equal 15. If he just told us, and that's 5 selah from each category, why does he have to add it up for us and say 15? And so the Gemara explains that Rabbi Meir teaches us the following. The master may not give less than this total number of 15 selah, but if he gives him less of one type and more of the other type, we have no problem with it. He has fulfilled the mitzvah. Now, not everybody, who had custody of a slave, an indentured servant, right, a Hebrew slave, had a wine press or had a threshing floor or had livestock. Rather, he's going to give either money or, commodities, chattel worth that amount of money. It doesn't have to be from those specific categories, is what Rabbi Meir is telling us. Now, the Gemara asks, what is the reasoning of Rabbi Meir? How does he deduce that you owe 15 selah by saying it's 5 selah from each category? And how does he deduce that you owe this? And so the Gemara explains that Rabbi Meir derives a verbal analogy from empty-handed, stated with regard to the severance gift, you shall not send him away empty-handed, and empty-handed stated with regard to a firstborn, a bechor. All the firstborn of your sons you shall redeem, and none shall appear before me, before the Lord, empty-handed. So just as there in the case of the firstborn, one must give the Kohen, the priest, 5 selah, 5 silver coins, so too here in the case of severance gift, one must give 5 selah. So that's where Rabbi Meir gets the number 5 selah, right, from the giving when you redeem the firstborn by giving money to a priest. So that's where he gets the 5 selah, and then he says, okay, it's 5 selah of wine, 5 selah of livestock, 5 selah of grain, and that adds up to 15 selah. So the Gemara asks, but one can say that he is obligated to give only 5 selah in total from all of the 3 types listed in the verse. How does Rabbi Meir know it has to be 5 from each category? And the Gemara answers, if empty-handed were written at the end of the verse, meaning in Deuteronomy 15:14, the law would be as you said, right? If we read again, and you shall grant severance to him out of your flock and out of your threshing floor and out of your wine press. But it says in Deuteronomy 15:13, the previous verse, you shall not send him away empty-handed. And you shall grant severance to him out of your flock, out of your threshing floor, and out of your wine press, right? So Rabbi Meir is saying, okay, you shall not send him empty-handed, and then it says the categories that you have to give him from. And so if the empty-handed had been written at the end of the categories of Deuteronomy 15:14, then we could have said 5 selah total. But since it was written in the previous verse, it must mean empty-handed, not empty-handed, meaning 5 selah of each of the 3 categories. And the Gemara asks, and let us derive a verbal analogy between empty-handed and empty-handed from the case of the burnt offering appearance in the temple brought on the pilgrimage festivals, when the people would ascend to the temple in Jerusalem on Pesach, Passover, on Shavuos, and on Sukkot, right? If they were going to go into the temple during those festivals, you can't enter the temple empty-handed. You have to bring a gift for the Lord, as it were. And the Torah commands that in Deuteronomy 16:16, and they shall not appear before the Lord empty-handed. So the burnt offering of appearance has no fixed value. And the Gemara answers that the verse states, of that which the Lord your God has blessed you, which indicates that one must give a respectable amount as a severance gift, right? That's the continuation of 15:14, right? They'll sort of split the verse in the text here, but it's really, and you shall grant severance to him out of your flock and out of your threshing floor and out of your wine press and out of your wine press of that which the Lord your God has blessed you, right? You are blessed that you're in a position where you're able to have a Hebrew slave. So you're blessed. So when you send him out after his 6 years of servitude that he served you and wasn't paid, right? He served you, you didn't have to pay him. You had to feed and shelter him, etc., but you didn't have to pay him. But now when you send him on his way, you shall give him, this 5 selah from each category, according to Rabbi Meir. And the motivation and the source in the Torah is you shall give him of that which the Lord has blessed you, of that which the Lord has blessed you, of that which the Lord your God has blessed you, which indicates that one must give a respectable amount as a severance gift. Now, the Baraisa states that Rabbi Yehuda says that a freed slave, a slave at the end of his servitude, is not given 15 selah, but rather 30 selah. And what is Rabbi Yehuda's reasoning? He ties the 30 selah of severance to the 30 shekels of the fine that is paid for a slave who, when somebody else's ox gores your slave, that person owes you 30 shekels. And the Gemara asks, what is the reasoning of Rabbi Yehuda? The Gemara answers, he derives a verbal analogy between giving, as stated with regard to the severance gift, from the expression of giving stated in connection to a Canaanite slave gored by an ox. He shall give to their master 30 shekels of silver. Just as there he must pay 30 shekels for the slave, so too here in the case of a severance gift, he must pay 30. Right? So what Rabbi Yehuda is saying, okay, you're talking about, saying, Rabbi Meir, you're coming up with this number, 5 selah from each of the 3 categories, but you're tying it to, redeeming the firstborn from a priest. I'm going to tie the number of the money I have to give as a severance gift to a slave to the value of a slave when he's gored by an ox. Now, we're still comparing a Hebrew slave to a Canaanite slave, but at least in Rabbi Yehuda's verbal analogy, he's comparing a slave to a slave. It's a much closer verbal analogy. Seems to make more sense. And in fact, the law is that you pay 30 selah, not 15. So we follow Rabbi Yehuda. Now the Gemara asks, but let Rabbi Yehuda derive a similar verbal analogy based on giving with regard to the severance gift and giving from the valuations, right? The valuations, I told you before, if a person vows to give his value to the temple treasury, well, if he's a male between 20 and 60, he has to give 50 shekels, right? Because he said, he could have said, I will give 20 shekels. But he said, I will give my value. Well, that's 50 shekels. So now we're saying, we're putting a value on a person. Now he's not a slave. He's just a person giving a free will gift. But the word giving is used in both places. So why doesn't Rabbi Yehuda say that the number of shekels you have to give your slave when he goes free is like the number of shekels that one has to give the temple treasury when he makes this Arachin vow, 50 shekels, right? Why not 50? That's the question that the Gemara is asking, and the Gemara answers. One answer is, as people say, that if you grasp too much, you did not grasp anything. If you grasped a little, you grasped something. Now, this phrase is actually used in modern Hebrew to say, don't bite off more than you can chew, right? If you grab, which is the first one, right? If you take too much, you end up with nothing. If you just take a little, you'll end up with something, right? Now, in this context, it's saying, well, if we really have a perfectly valid verbal analogy to assume that the severance gift should be 30 shekels, and we have another perfectly valid verbal analogy that would say that the parting gift should be 50 shekels, whenever we have, sort of an interpretation that could go either way, and there are 2 values given, so because this is a rabbinic interpretation, the Torah never specifies how much severance gift you should do. So they're not going to impose as a law a greater number than the Torah seems to be demanding, right? So if you use the lesser number, you know that, if there are 2 numbers, well, the lesser number is included in the larger number. So, we know we're right when we assign the lesser number. If we assign the bigger number, we might be overreaching. And I remember I saw I think it was like a TED Talk or something, where... it was a demonstration in front of a classroom The teacher had a whole bunch of magic markers and said to the student, okay, ready? Catch as many magic markers as you can. And she took the bundle of magic markers and just threw them up in the air. And the kid, tried to like catch as many as she could out of the air and ended up with nothing. It was like very awkward and ended up with nothing in her hand. Then the teacher said, okay, catch the blue marker, right? And she threw all the markers up in the air and the student just kept an eye on the blue marker and caught it. Ended up with one, right? If you grasp too much, you end up with nothing. If you grasp a little, you end up with something. And that blue marker idea, is a great technique for prioritizing what's important in your life. I was really thinking about that when we were shooting the movie. Like in every scene that we were shooting, like what was the blue marker shot? What was the shot that we had to have? What was the shot that was going to really like stand out and make the movie cool? And let's make sure we get that shot. And then additional coverage that's going to help us in the editing room. Wonderful, let's get it. But if we are going to end up short of time, let's make sure we get the blue marker shot. That's a good lesson. Where am I? And furthermore, with respect to comparing, do we give 30 shekels or do we give 50 shekels as a severance gift, one should derive the law of a slave, i.e. the severance gift, from another law of a slave, i.e. the 30 shekels, when a Canaanite slave is gored by an ox. So there's two reasons to go for the 30. The 30 is the smaller number, so we don't over-decree. And the 30 also has to do with slaves, so it makes more sense. And that's why the law ended up, the severance gift for a Hebrew slave who goes free is 30 shekels. Now the Baraisa further teaches that Rabbi Shimon says the master gives 50, right? Rabbi Shimon went with the big number. Rabbi Shimon says give him 50 shekels, like the 50 shekels of the valuations of an adult male who pledges his value to the temple treasury. And the Gemara asks, what is the reasoning of Rabbi Shimon? Well, he derived a verbal analogy between giving and giving from valuations. Just as there he pays 50, so too here we pay 50. And the Gemara asks, but one can say that as this verbal analogy is referring to valuations in general, he should pay the smallest of the valuations, right? If you're saying it's just based on the word giving with valuations, an adult male is 50 shekels, an adult female is less. A male child is less than that. A female child is less than that. An old man is less than that. An old woman is less than that. Why should we say it's the highest value in terms of, in ancient society, who was the most productive, right? Was kind of like a male in his prime. So the Torah said he has, the highest value for this giving valuation, pledging your value to the temple treasury. So why choose the biggest one of that set of values? Why not choose the smallest or a middle value? That's what the Gemara is asking. Where am I? Right, so but why not go with the minimum of the valuations, which is 3 selah, which is probably like a baby? And the Gemara answers that it is written of that which the Lord your God has blessed you. You're supposed to give him a severance gift of that which the Lord your God has blessed you. So you're not going to send them out with a measly amount. You have to be generous in the severance, the gift of severance. So that's why Rabbi Shimon goes to the highest of the valuations. And the Gemara asks, but let Rabbi Shimon derive, like Rabbi Yehuda, the verbal analogy between giving and giving from the verse discussing the goring of a Canaanite slave, teaching that just as there he pays 30, so too here he pays 30. Why doesn't Rabbi Shimon agree with Rabbi Yehuda? And the Gemara adds that there are 2 reasons to prefer this derivation, as we just said before. One is that if you grasp too much, you grasp nothing, but if you grasp a little, you grasp something. And furthermore, one should derive the law of a slave from a case involving a slave. And Rabbi Shimon derives, and the Gemara answers, what's Rabbi Shimon's answer? Because he derives a verbal analogy between poverty and poverty. With regard to valuations, the Torah states, but if he is too poor, and concerning a Hebrew slave, the verse says, and if your brother grows poor, and then he sells himself into slavery. So there's a reason to link valuations to this slave who sold himself into slavery because he became poor. Having ascertained the source for each of the opinions in the Baraisa, now the Gemara analyzes their opinions. And the Gemara asks, granted, with regard to the opinion of Rabbi Meir, who says 15 selah total is the severance gift, This is as it is written, flock, threshing floor, and winepress, as he derives from these three terms that the severance gift must be worth 5 selah per category, therefore 15 selah. But according to the opinions of Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon, who say 30 selah or 50, I mean, the difference between selah and shekels is not that important here. But at any rate, let's say Rabbi Yehuda says 30 shekels and Rabbi Shimon says 50 shekels. So why do I need these terms, flock, threshing floor, and winepress, in light of the fact that one may give his slave from any product? Why did the Torah specify that you will give to your slave as he goes free from your livestock, the threshing floor, or the winepress? And the Gemara answers, these terms are necessary for that which is taught in a baraisa. One might have thought that one grants severance gifts only from the flock, the threshing floor, and the winepress. Right? That when you give him the severance gift, you must give him an animal and a bag of grain and a wineskin full of wine. Right? That you have to give him those three things. One might have thought that. So from where is it derived that you can include any kind of valuable commodity? And the verse states, of that which the Lord your God has blessed you. If so what is the meaning when the verse states flock, threshing floor, and winepress? You're going to give to your slave of that with which the Lord has blessed you. So why does the Torah mention winepress, threshing floor, and livestock? Why does the Torah mention those three? If you can give him of anything that you have that's valuable to you. Why does the Torah mention these three categories? This serves to tell you that just as a flock, a threshing floor, and a winepress are unique in that they are included in the category of blessing, i.e. they grow and multiply, right? The grapes in the vineyard grow and multiply, the grain in the field grows and multiplies, the livestock grows and multiplies. So too, all items that are included in the category of blessing may be given as a severance gift. Now this excludes money, which does not increase on its own. This is the statement of Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says this excludes mules, which cannot reproduce. I mean, the law does not exclude money. You can give him money because that's, very useful to the slave as he goes on his way. So we don't exclude that, but we want, and money grows too, right? I mean, we see that money is deposited and you can put it in a bank or invest it and money can grow also. It can shrink, but it can also grow. But mules do not reproduce. So the Gemara asks, and Rabbi Shimon, why does he exclude money but not mules? And the Gemara answers, well, with regard to mules, their bodies grow and enhance. Their bodies grow from when they're young. Although they do not reproduce, they still grow. And Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, why doesn't he exclude money? He maintains that one can conduct business with money and thereby profit from it. And in this manner, money may increase. And the Gemara notes, and it is necessary for the Torah to mention a flock, a threshing floor, and a winepress, as if the merciful one had written only flock, I would say that animals, yes, the master may give them to his slave upon his release, but that which grows from the ground, no, he may not give that. Therefore, the merciful one writes threshing floor. And if the Torah had written only threshing floor, I would say that that which grows from the ground, yes, he may give. But animals, no, he may not give that. Therefore, the merciful one writes flock. And the Gemara asks, well, since threshing floor is stated, why do I need to mention the winepress? That also comes from the grapes that grow from the ground. Now we're on 17b. And the Gemara answers, according to one master, Rabbi Shimon, this term serves to exclude money. And according to the other master, Rabbi Eliezer, it serves to exclude mules. That's why winepress is included. And the sage taught with regard to the verse, and you shall grant severance to him out of your flock and out of your threshing floor and out of your winepress of that which the Lord your God has blessed you. One might have thought that if the house is blessed due to the slave, then the master grants him a severance gift when he leaves. But if the house is not blessed due to him, he does not grant him a severance gift. Right? What does that mean? Well, when you had that slave for 6 years, was he a contributor? Now you could say, was he visibly, bringing income into the house, and so was bringing blessing into the house that was good for the family? Or you could say that he was lucky. It was lucky to have him here. Like he just did the standard work that a slave does. It's not like he himself brought in a lot of wealth. But while he was here, the master's business was prospering. And that's a little bit like Joseph, right? When Joseph was enslaved to Potiphar in Egypt, Potiphar's house, was blessed in so many different ways. And later, when Joseph became viceroy over Egypt, Egypt was blessed in so many ways. So you could say that Potiphar and later all of Egypt was blessed because Joseph, let's say in Potiphar's house, Potiphar was blessed because Joseph the slave was living in the house. So you might have thought that, okay, because since the verse states, you shall give to him as a severance gift, of that with which the Lord has blessed you, that you would only give a severance gift if the slave brought blessing into your house. You might have thought that. Therefore, the verse states, you shall grant severance, ha'anek te'anek, with the double form of the verb used for emphasis to indicate that you must grant him a severance gift in any case, whether you feel that he blessed your house or not. If he worked for 6 years, you give him the severance gift. If so, what is the meaning when the verse states, of that which the Lord your God has blessed you? This teaches that all that one gives him as a severance gift should be in accordance with the blessing that one possesses. Like, you should go above and beyond the minimum. Like, if this guy brought a lot of blessing into your house, be mindful and really give him, like the way that the Lord blessed you while he was here, bless him. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says the meaning of the statements of the Torah is as they are written, i.e., as indicated by a straightforward reading of the verse. That's the words as they are written, right? Elazar ben Azariah says when you read the Torah, it has to make sense on the surface, right? The simple meaning has to make sense. There may be deeper meanings, but the simple meaning is the first meaning we need to understand. Therefore, if the house was blessed due to the slave, the master grants him a severance gift. And if the house was not blessed due to him, he does not grant him a severance gift at all. Right? Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah is saying, well, according to the simple reading of this verse, if the slave didn't bless your home by being there, you don't owe him the severance. If so, what is the meaning when the verse states, you shall grant severance, right? The doubled verb. In Hebrew, very often, you take one verb and you say it twice, and that's often translated as verily or indeed, right? You shall indeed bless him. Bless, when it says you shall indeed bless him, it means the Hebrew is probably, mevorak, mevorak, something like that. Like, bless, bless. Similar to tzedek, tzedek shall you pursue. Justice, justice shall you pursue. When a word is doubled, it's to tell you, make sure to do it well, to do it strongly, to do it right. It's emphasis. So are we going to learn out from you shall grant severance, ha'anek to anek, right? You shall grant, essentially. So do we learn out that you have to bless him whether he blessed you or not? And the Torah, so the Gemara answers, the Torah spoke in the language of people, i.e., the emphasis of the doubled verb is merely stylistic, but it does not serve to teach a novel law. This is what Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah would say. The simple meaning is you only give him the severance gift if his presence in your house blessed you, of that which the Lord blessed you. So if while he was here you weren't blessed, you don't have to give him a severance gift. And he says, and to answer the claim that because the verb is doubled, no, you have to give it even if God didn't bless you while he was there. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah would say the Torah spoke in the language of people. Right? Doubling a verb is something that people do all the time just to make sure you listen. It doesn't mean that we learn out from that a law that you pay him whether you were blessed or not. Now, this idea, the Torah spoke in the language of people, if you think about all the interpretations and derivations and rabbinic decrees and laws that we have found that are based on just a little extra the, or an extra or an extra, to you, or instead of by you, or something like that, if you're going to say, well, the Torah speaks in the language of people, how can you learn out all of those laws from these seemingly extraneous letters or little words, right? So says Rav Steinsaltz, although phrased as a comprehensive principle that the Torah spoke in the language of people, This concept is applied in only very circumscribed cases. Double verbs are used frequently in the Torah. For example, in the verse, you shall release, shalea teshala, shaleach teshalach, right? Deuteronomy 22:7. According to Rabbi Yishmael and his school, these doubled verbs have no exegetical significance, as the doubling of the verb is simply a standard linguistic form of emphasis, or as the Talmud phrases it, the Torah spoke in the language of people. By contrast, Rabbi Akiva and his school sought to draw halakhic inferences, legal inferences, from any time these verbs were repeated. There was a repetition of verbs. And this is not a general principle of biblical exegesis, as it applies only to cases where a verb form is repeated. Early commentaries broaden the application of the principle that the Torah speaks in the language of people to explain such phenomena as the anthropomorphic expressions used in reference to God. Like when you say that God is happy or God is angry, that's an anthropomorphic projection. Like, God doesn't feel emotions like we do, does he? Right? I mean, God tells us that God can be pleased or God can be angry, but it is in no way, some kind of uncontrolled emotion that God would have the way we do. It just helps us to understand, how he looks at our actions when we do his will or when we fail to do his will. Anthropomorphizing God like that would be a heresy if we did it, but it's written in the Torah. So this is just to tell you that we have to be very careful when we read these verses in the Torah. Sometimes it's just speaking in the language of people so that to help us understand. And sometimes it adds extra words or doubles a verb to teach us a law. And we can't figure out which is which. That's why we rely on our sages to do that for us. The sages taught a Hebrew slave serves the son of his deceased master, but does not serve the daughter, right? Meaning that a Hebrew slave whose master dies remains, during the 6 years, but the master had a son, so the Hebrew slave remains a slave to the firstborn, right? To the heir. That his master's son will now, administrate the remaining years of servitude for the son. But if the master did not have a son, the slave goes free. He doesn't become the Hebrew slave of a daughter who steps in, who inherits from the father. A Hebrew maidservant, the female slave, serves neither the son nor the daughter, right? If her master dies, she goes free. She doesn't remain enslaved to the son of the master and nor the daughter, but only the master. A pierced slave, right? One who finishes 6 years and decided to remain a slave because it was better for him as a slave. A pierced slave and a Hebrew slave sold to a Gentile serve neither the son nor the daughter. They are not inheritable by the child of the master, and neither the son nor daughter. And the master said above, meaning the sage that we're talking about here, the sage said above, a Hebrew slave serves the son but does not serve the daughter. And the Gemara asks, from where is this matter derived? Why is a Hebrew slave inherited by the master's son if the master dies, but not by his daughter? And Deuteronomy 15:12 says, and he shall serve you 6 years. And this indicates that he serves you, the master, and not an heir. I.e., if the master dies, his slave does not serve one who inherits his estate. Do you say you and not an heir? Or perhaps is it even you and not a son? You're saying not his heir, but you're saying his son, yes, other heirs, no. Okay, well, why are you including his son when you say that no other heirs can inherit the Hebrew slave? And the Gemara answers, when it says 6 years he shall labor, which does not indicate any exclusion, the inclusion of a son is thereby stated. How then do I uphold the other verse, and he shall serve you 6 years? The expression serve you emphasizes that he serves only you, but he does not serve another heir. How does he shall serve you include the son? And the answer is because the firstborn son, of a man in that patriarchal system, steps into the father's shoes in many ways. Not he inherits the double portion if he has siblings, but also, he has certain sort of rights and obligations that appertain to him immediately. Like he really steps into his father's shoes. Different than if a brother, for example, if the man had no children and he died and his brother is going to inherit his estate. His brother doesn't have the same kinds of legal obligations and rights that a son would have when he steps into his father's place. When the Gemara asks, what did you see that led you to include the son who inherits a Hebrew slave and to exclude the brother from inheriting his brother's slave? And the Gemara answers, I include the son as he stands in the place of his father to designate her. Meaning, just as a father can designate a Hebrew maidservant as a wife for himself, right? When he purchases a Hebrew maidservant, he can actually betroth her. She doesn't have to accept, but he can betroth her. He can upgrade her to a wife. And he can similarly do that for his son. Just as a father can designate a Hebrew maidservant as a wife for himself, so too he can betroth her on behalf of his son. And similarly, he replaces his father with regard to an ancestral field. If one redeems a field consecrated by his father, right? If a man consecrated a field, he said, this field, I'm giving it to the temple. I am consecrating it for God's work. I'm giving this field to the temple, right? So now it belongs to the temple, but it's an ancestral field. So he says, okay, what I really meant to do is give that amount of money. I'm going to redeem my field. Here's the money that it's worth, and the field comes back into my family. So if he redeems the field, that field comes back into his family. But if he doesn't redeem it, and somebody else redeems that field, then when the Jubilee year comes and we undo purchases and sales of fields, right? Every 50 years, if I sold you my field because, I was poor, I needed to sell my ancestral field, right? Meaning the ancestral land portions that Joshua distributed when the children of Israel entered Israel, they're meant to stay in the families. So if I sell that kind of land to you, I'm only selling it to you for the years remaining until the next Jubilee year, and then it automatically comes back to me. But if I consecrate it to the temple, it's not going to come back to me in the Jubilee year. It will if I redeem it before the Jubilee year. Okay, then it's mine. But if somebody else redeems it, then I don't get it back because he didn't buy it from me. He bought it from the temple, as it were, after I consecrated it. So a son is like his father in terms of pulling that field back into their ancestral heritage, but a brother is not. Right? In the nuances of that law, a son is not like a brother. Now the Gemara asks, on the contrary, I should include the brother. The brother is a stronger form of being an heir than a son. Why? As he stands in his brother's place with regard to levirate marriage. Right? When a man dies and he doesn't have a son, doesn't have children, and he leaves a widow, right? Then his brother comes in his place, and he has the option to marry that woman by having sexual intercourse with her, and then he becomes like he takes over as the husband of his dead brother's, widow. So the brother steps into the place of the brother, right? This seems to be stronger than what a son can do, because a son does not perform levirate marriage; only a brother does. And the Gemara responds, this proof doesn't work, as is there levirate marriage other than in the case where there is no son? The brother steps into the place because there is no son. If there was a son, there wouldn't be levirate marriage. So the Gemara asks, rather, the reason for this law is specifically that the son is stronger, right, than the brother, is specifically that there is this refutation that a levirate marriage applies only when there is no son. Does that not indicate that without this consideration, I would say that a brother is preferable to a son? But let me derive that a son has a greater claim of standing in place of his father than a brother from the fact that here, with regard to the preference of a son, there are two cases. Designation of a Hebrew maidservant and the ancestral field, as we just learned. And here in the case of the brother, there is only one time that the brother is preferred, and that's when there's levirate marriage. And the Gemara answers, well, with regard to the ancestral field also, the Tana derives that law from the same refutation, meaning the Tana learns from the case of levirate marriage that only the son, not the brother, takes the place of his father for the redemption of the field, employing the same reasoning mentioned above. Is there levirate marriage other than in a case where there is no son? Therefore, without this consideration, there is only one supporting example for each claim, right? The brother is going to, redeem the ancestral field only because there is no son. So we don't have a sufficient proof. The Baraisa taught that a Hebrew maidservant serves neither the brother nor the daughter. Right? If her master dies, she goes free. She doesn't remain enslaved for the master's son or his daughter. And the Gemara asked, from where is this matter derived? And Rabbi Pada said, as the verse states with regard to the pierced Hebrew slave who elected to remain enslaved after his 6 years were up, quote, and also to your maidservant you shall do likewise. And the verse juxtaposes a Hebrew maidservant to a pierced slave. Just as a pierced slave serves neither the son nor the daughter, he elected to remain enslaved to the master, not to the master's children. So too, a Hebrew maidservant serves neither the son nor the daughter. And the Gemara asks, and does this verse, and also to your maidservant you shall do likewise, come to teach this matter? The Tana requires it for that which is taught in a Baraisa, that the verse, and also to your maidservant you shall do likewise, is a command to grant her a severance gift. That's what we're teaching by that verse. Do you say that this comparison obligates one to grant a severance gift to a Hebrew maidservant? Or is it teaching only that the law of piercing a Hebrew slave's ear with an awl, which is stated immediately beforehand, applies to a Hebrew maidservant as well? But we know that's not true. That only applies to a male slave. The female cannot elect to remain enslaved after her 6 years are up. Only a male can do that. And the Gemara explains when it says with regard to piercing, but if the slave shall say, it is better for me with my master, which indicates that a Hebrew slave can issue this declaration, but a Hebrew maidservant cannot. The law of piercing is thereby stated and accounted for. So how do I realize the meaning of the verse? And also to your maidservant you shall do likewise. What do we learn from that? This obligates a master to grant a severance gift to a freed Hebrew maidservant. If so, one cannot derive from this verse that a Hebrew maidservant serves neither the son nor the daughter. And the Gemara answers, if so, that it comes only to compare her to a pierced Hebrew slave, let the verse write merely, to your maidservant likewise. What is the meaning of the additional phrase, to your maidservant likewise you shall do? Draw two conclusions from this. A Hebrew maidservant does not serve the son or the daughter, and she is granted severance gifts when she goes free. The Baraisa further teaches that a pierced Hebrew slave and one sold to a Gentile serve neither the son nor the daughter. And the Gemara explains, the law of a pierced slave is as it is written, and his master shall pierce his ear with an awl, and he shall serve him forever. Exodus 21:6, which indicates that he serves his master, but not the son or the daughter. And the Gemara asks, from where is it derived that the same applies to a Hebrew slave sold to a Gentile? Chizkiah says that the verse states with regard to the emancipating of a slave who was sold to a Gentile, and he shall reckon with his purchaser, which teaches that this applies only to his purchaser, but not to the heirs of his purchaser. Rava says by Torah law, a Gentile inherits the property of his father. Now that we're talking about the property of a Gentile, in this case the Hebrew slave owned by a Gentile, now let's learn a little bit more about property owned by Gentiles under Torah law. By Torah law, a Gentile inherits the property of his father. Why would we think not otherwise? How do we know that? As it is stated with regard to one sold to a Gentile, and he shall reckon with his purchaser, but not with his purchaser's heirs. One can derive from here by inference that ordinarily a Gentile has heirs. By contrast, by Torah law, a convert does not inherit the property of his father or any other Gentile, right? Because a convert, his parents legally are no longer his birth parents, but Abraham and Sarah, as we learned yesterday. Once he converts, he's considered a new person with no ties to his previous family. He can hang out with them, he can love them, but he doesn't have legal ties. Rather, a convert inherits the property of his father by rabbinic law. By Torah law, he does not inherit from his father, but by rabbinic law, he does. And can you guess why? If the Torah says, no, he doesn't inherit because he's a new person, he's now the son of Abraham and Sarah, why did the rabbis issue a decree that, yes, he can inherit the property of his Gentile father? This is so that the convert would not say, well, I'm really enjoying being Jewish, but to remain Jewish, I have to give up my massive inheritance. Maybe people would get weak and not do that. So by rabbinic decree, the convert does. As we learned in a Mishna in Tractate Demai, with regard to a convert and a Gentile who inherited property from their Gentile father, right? Two brothers, one is a convert, one is not. They inherited property from their Gentile father. The convert can say to the Gentile, you take the objects from dad that are used for idol worship, and I will take money. You take wine that was used for libations in idolatry, and I will take produce. provided that these objects have not entered the domain of the convert, he may divide everything with his brother, so that his brother, who's not a Jew and doesn't mind, taking these objects that were used for idolatry, let him take those objects, and the convert will, not take things that is prohibited for him to have. But once these objects have come into the convert's possession, it is prohibited for him to exchange these objects with his brother, as he would thereby be benefiting from idolatry. Right? If somehow the father said, okay, John gets, all these statues that were used for idolatry, and Peter, gets all the money, right? And John was a convert, right? So like all these statues that were used for idolatry, he can't say to Peter, well, listen, you're still an idolater. Take these statues. You like them. They're pretty. They're worth a lot of money. And you just give me the money and we'll switch. John can't do that, because if he does, he's benefiting from idols. He's benefiting from idolatry, so he can't make that exchange. And if it would enter your mind that a convert inherits property from his father by Torah law, it should be prohibited when these objects have not yet come into his possession as well, to make this division of the inheritance, because, if he inherits from his father automatically, then as soon, as the father dies, he's already got it. Like, he can't make a division of the stuff because he is his father's heir. So it must be that by Torah law, the convert is not his father's heir, and it's only by rabbinic decree that he remains his father's heir. So rather, a convert inherits property. I'm almost done. Questions or comments, please get them in. A convert inherits property from his father by rabbinic law, as this is a decree that the sages instituted lest the convert return to his previous wayward ways. And the sages were concerned that due to his concern over losing his inheritance, a convert might return to his Gentile lifestyle. In any event, as he does not inherit his father's property by Torah law, the idols are not considered his property. So this halacha, this law, is also taught in a baraisa. In what case is this statement said? He may do this when they inherited, but when the convert and the Gentile formed a partnership, it is prohibited for him to divide the property so that the Gentile takes the idols, as the convert would thereby benefit indirectly from the idols, since they're used to offset, other parts of the inheritance that would flow to him. So with regard to the same issue, it is taught by Torah law and by rabbinic law. A Gentile does not inherit property from his father who is a convert, nor does a convert inherit property from his father who is a convert. Right? Interesting. The father and the son both convert. Right? Now, let's say that we're talking about an adult son. So the father converts. But when the son was born, the father was still an idolater. So even though both of them convert, you might say, well, now, since they're both converts, they're both Jews, so the son would inherit from his father. But no, because when they convert, they both become sons of Abraham and Sarah. That the fact that the father later became a Jew doesn't change that when the son was born, his father was not. The son was not conceived in sanctity, as is the way the Talmud puts it. And so, even though the father and the son both convert, the son doesn't inherit from the father. Now, if the father converts with his minor sons, right, the whole family converts while they're minors, that might be a different issue. But when they both convert as adults, you have this outcome. As we learned in the Mishna, if one borrowed from a convert whose sons converted with him, and therefore when they converted, there were no longer any legal ties between the sons and the father under Jewish law, so the borrower does not return the money to the creditor's sons, as they are not considered his heirs. And if he does return it to the sons, the sages are not pleased with him, because they're pretending that that they're the father's heirs when they're not, right? Even though the father also converted, they both become, the father and son actually become sons of Abraham and Sarah. So the Gemara asks, but isn't it taught in a baraisa that the sages are pleased with him? And in another baraisa that the sages are pleased with him. And the Gemara answers, this is not difficult. Here it is referring to a convert whose conception and birth were not in sanctity of the Jewish people. i.e. his father was a Gentile when he was born, and afterward the son converted. And in this case, there are no legal ties between the father and the son, and therefore one who owes money to the father is not required to pay the son. And there it is referring to a case where he was not conceived in sanctity, i.e. his mother conceived him before she converted, and only his birth was in sanctity, as she converted when pregnant. It is appropriate to return money to this individual. Okay, that's what I've got for us tonight. Tomorrow we'll continue with page 18. The hour is late, so I'll just take one or two questions if I've got them. Oh, I talk a mile a minute for that whole hour, and it's good to let my mouth rest. Bill, depending on the definition of slavery that is being used by that statistic and how broad it is, I guess when I said earlier that 1/3 of the ancient world was enslaved in one form or another, according to Bill, it's that statement, depending on how the statistic is used, it's either an overstatement. Do royal serfs count or not is my immediate question. Or if you do include those forms of compulsory service, then honestly, 1/3 sounds a bit on the conservative side. The ancient world was not what I would call pleasant, says Bill. Guy, thank you, Bill. Guy, if there was a great chance that you would not get much work out of your slave, the base rate of severance pay must have been low indeed. The 15 sela must not amount to very much. I think Guy is saying, well, if there was a possibility from the outset, that some slaves are going to be super productive and others are going to be very unproductive, then that minimum severance gift, is probably set pretty low. I would say that if you're saying, hey, thanks for 6 years of work, here's 15 sela, it's not that much money. I mean, I think you're absolutely right. 30 actually was the number, but still, it's not that much money. Joe, doesn't the severance pay have to be high quality items as it is to reflect the bounty and gifts of the Lord to the owner? You can't honor Hashem by giving items that are about to expire. Just so. Very good, Joe. And finally, Sharon, isn't it possible that a blessing is not obvious to someone? I think of the flaming serpents, the seraphim, the Israelites encountered in the desert all of a sudden. It is not only a curse that they encountered these snakes, but a blessing that they did not encounter them earlier. Isn't it possible that a blessing may be simply the absence of a curse that is usually encountered? That type of blessing can go easily unnoticed. Very good. It might be, okay, while that slave was in your house, your house didn't get bigger, you didn't get a better job, you didn't get a raise, you didn't have any new kids, but, your house didn't burn down, your kids are still healthy, you didn't get fired from your job, just status quo might be a huge blessing that you might not have had the slave not been a member of your household. Very good. Okay, that's what I've got for us today. And with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow night, Thursday.